and welcome to the Licensing Committee meeting. It is now 7 p.m. and I'd like to start the meeting. I am Councillor Aaron Green and I will be the chair for this meeting. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication on the Council's website. There are no planned fire alarms this evening. In the case of an emergency, please evacuate the building using the nearest available exit and congregate at the assembly point outside the college. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. Carly, have any apologies been received?
We've received apologies from Councillors Heath and Councillor Salmons. No further apologies.
And Councillor Fletcher is subbing for Councillor Heath. Thank you. And any other apologies? Does anyone?
Councillor Holloway as well.
Okay, thank you. Can we add that, please, Carly? Thank you. Agenda item 2, minutes. I move that the minutes of the Licensing Committee meeting held on the 13th of November 2024 be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? Thank you. Agenda item 3. I have not agreed to any urgent items of business. Item 4 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest to make? Thank you. Item 5 on the agenda, licensing fees and charges, which can be seen on pages 11 to 38. Can I ask Paul Adams to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report brings back the fees and charges setting process for all the licensing fees and charges. It's bringing to you the responses to the statutory consultation for your consideration. We are required under legislation to consider the responses before we make the final decision. There has been no changes to any of the proposed fees or charges following consideration by officers, but obviously it's for members to make that final decision. I mean, I don't think there's probably anything else I need to say, Chair. I'm sure there may be some questions that want to be asked.
Thank you, Paul. Does any members got any questions? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, Paul. Could you just help me understand what exactly we mean by increase to reduce trading account deficit shared across a number of issued licences? And the reason I'm asking is because that's the reasoning given in a lot of the report, but particularly when it comes to driver licences, hackney carriage and private hire, new licences, 1 year, 3 year, etc. These have gone up by, 16%, 21%, 28%, 32%, and that's the reason that's being given. Now, obviously for a couple of years now, we've been operating under a sort of cost recovery model, and at the fees and charges setting licensing meeting that we had last year for financial year 24-25, those fees didn't go up. So the fact they didn't go up last year and they're now going up by 23, 24, 32%, and we have a cost recovery model, suggests to me that our costs have gone up quite exponentially. So if they have, what is driving those costs? And obviously I mentioned the reasoning that we've got in there isn't because costs are increasing. It's this increase to reduce trading account deficit. So I'm just wondering if you can give us some more information around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of factors that influence the cost of the service. Effectively, what we do, we look at each area of licensing that we do. We look at the costs that are associated with that, and we are trying to portion the time. Majority of our costs are officer time, having officers to deal with the applications. And we try to apportion the costs of the officers and all the other bits and pieces by a percentage of time that we spend on those activities. We are allowed and we are permitted that if we run at a deficit, we can recover costs in later years. If we actually run at a profit, for whatever reason, then we can offset those costs or reduce costs sort of later on down the line. The trading accounts are always sort of a year behind, and the income each year is very dependent on the number of licences we process for that year. For instance, things like a private hire operator's licence, that can be a 5-year licence. So if the majority of our licences all renew in 1 year, so we see a lot of income 1 year and then we don't see a lot of income for the following years. There are other licences that renew on an annual basis, the Licensing Act fees, there's an annual fee with that, so that's much more of an even income distribution. We try not to keep raising and lowering prices every year because, as I say, there's lots of variables in that. We also spread it across the cost across the number of licences. So, for instance, things like private hire driver's licences and Hackney carriage driver licences, we have less driver licences now than we have done for a number of years. Some of that is sort of the fallout from COVID and the change to sort of their operating models and their business themselves. So there's less drivers around. So that's why in those particular areas, particularly, the costs have gone up because the cost of everything has gone up. But also the number of licences that cost is spread across has reduced. So that's why it's seen a sort of a bigger increase in particular areas. I think hopefully that gives some answer to your question.
Thank you, Bill. You got any follow-up, Councillor Anderson?
So it is the case that this year we have a lot fewer licences for Hackney carriage and private hire. Is that the case?
I mean, there is definitely less licences for Hackney carriage and private hire this year than there was last year, and there was less licences than the year before. So the number of licences in relation to the Hackney carriage private hire trade has reduced, but obviously costs of providing the service goes up. Whether an officer is dealing with 10 licences or 100 licences, the cost of that officer doesn't change. They have to still, be available to deal with those licences. Obviously, as time goes on, if we were overstaffed, significantly, then we would look at adjusting those costs. But, it's not as easy to sort of, all of a sudden switch off the fact that, if we've got 50 less licences across the Hackney carriage private hire trade, it doesn't directly relate to being able to reduce sort of staffing costs because those costs are sort of fixed costs.
Yeah, so that you've kind of touched on it there. That was going to be my next question, i.e., if we have a lot fewer licences, then to your mind, in your judgment, do we need the number of licensing officers that we've currently got? Is that?
I mean, I think not only do the officers process the applications, we're also responsible for the enforcement of all the legislation as well, making sure that licences are being adhered to, ensuring those that aren't licensed are sort of investigated. So whilst we may spend slightly less time in the processing side of things, it will see an increase in the enforcement activities that are surrounded by that. As I say, I mean, there's no sort of direct ability to say, well, we've got 50 less licences this year, so we're going to need less licensing officer time. And there are peaks and troughs, as I say. So, this year we may not have many renewals, but in 3 years' time, when all the 5-year renewals take place, we're going to need some additional staff and we'll spend more time on the processing. It's something that we do keep an eye on and we will monitor. And if the levels drop to a certain level, then we would obviously readdress the need for the staffing. But as it currently stands, we're certainly not overstaffed. Some would argue that we're still understaffed, but yeah.
Any more questions?
Okay, no, just to say I appreciate your responses Paul. I do think that some of the increases for these, you know, at 25, 30%, they do seem really quite high to me. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with those. I mean, that was before reading some of the consultation responses, which obviously, as you'll know, aren't overly pleased, as to be expected with rises like these. I understand rises, but some of these do seem quite heavy to me. But I appreciate your responses, Paul. That's it.
Thank you. Councillor Lydiard?
I was just going to ask Paul if we could get some information out to our PR people so that if there is a huge increase in one particular licence, maybe they could put it out on the to the newspapers or Nub News or whatever to explain why the prices have gone up.
Thank you. Councillor Chuckwood?
Thank you, Chair. In line with some of the questions Councillor Anderson have asked, I was actually going to pinpoint that, you know, for the fact that the increase is about 30%, right? And most of the comments are on that page 38, where some of the drivers were moaning and complaining that there's a lot. And what I'm saying is that because some of them are actually saying that they haven't got enough job, and Uber is taking most of their jobs, and school runs, some companies from outside Thurrock are also taking most of their jobs. My question is that, can they afford this?
I mean, various different companies, individuals have various different sort of trading models. So they all operate their businesses in very different ways. Some have been impacted more around the increased number of Uber vehicles that we've had over the last probably 8 years now. Some have been, you know, affected more by the changes in the procurement process around the school transport. There are others that are thriving and saying that they're doing really, really well at the moment. So it's very difficult to say everybody has been affected in the same way. What I will say is, you know, it is generally a tough time for what you would consider the traditional Hackney carriage trade, the Hackney carriage driver sitting on the rank waiting for work to arrive. Those are diversifying and looking at new ways of working with modern technology, have seen some benefits of that. That's not the answer to everything, but you know, there are people out there that are struggling, no doubt, but there are others out there that as a business, they're thriving and they're expanding.
Thank you, Paul. Have you got any further questions?
Sorry, because I was looking for one of the questions I asked is about the school runs, right? I guess the companies that are based in Thurrock should be doing most of the school runs. I mean, the taxi drivers, so they can actually make money out of that. But when you allow outside companies to come in, it's not good for the business.
I'm not sure if, are you able to answer
Yeah,
that,
I mean,
Paul?
I was just about to say, the allocation of school contracts is not something that licensing would deal with. Obviously, that is a different department within the council. And I'm sure it's for the best value of Thurrock and the ratepayers of Thurrock, really. That's why they're looking to sort of change the contract.
Thank you, Paul. And Councillor Abbas?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, for your report. Just to one question and clarification, actually. On these costs at 4.7, obviously it's a cost recovery based increase. So you have mentioned compliance with EU directive as a cost. So are we still complying with EU directives? It's on page 13.
There are a number of EU directives, sort of service provision directives, etc., that require online applications and the ability to be able to apply from abroad, that we are still aligned with. I've obviously, separation from the EU seems a while ago now, but it didn't get rid of all of the legislation. It was a lot of it was just continued on. We are still having to comply with certain bits.
Just another, obviously this is a cost recovery based increase, and it makes sense in a way. But, if you look at this, the biggest cost here is salaries. So if the salaries of staff is very tiny, but I think it's written salary as page 21 as a cost. So if the salaries are, I think, if I can read them correctly, is 254,000 or something, because it's very, very, I can't read even with my glasses. So, because we know the number of applicants are decreasing, if you're looking at all other applications, they're not like there are literally 2, 3, 4, 5 applications in different categories. So how can we justify these huge costs? Is it a time, I'm not sure if you can answer this, but time for us to restructure how we operate, and do we need the number of officers we have now?
I think the direct answer is we do need the number of officers that we currently have. We're not just responsible for the administration of the licences. We do a lot of work around the enforcement and maintenance of those licences. Our costs are, we do work on a cost recovery basis, and if we was to take on, and we have done previously, things like scrap metal licensing and things like that, when that came into effect, we looked to expand the team at those times to take on different areas of licensing. The only assurance I can give is that we do keep it under review. We're all, we try our hardest to obviously stay within budget, we look to try and fully recover, all the costs where we can, hence obviously looking at the licensing fees. When you look at our license fees and charges in comparison to other Essex local authorities, we're not vastly over or under in any of the areas. There will be differences because people do different things in different ways, and they pay people in different ways. So it's not an exact comparison, but it gives you the assurance that we're not overly expensive in any particular area. We're not charging thousands of pounds for something where somebody's charging hundreds of pounds for something. So.
Need more questions?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you,
going.
Chair. Thank you for your responses. Just finally on, obviously whatever we do, we do consultation process, But looking at these consultation responses, none of them is in favor of these increase. And I'm very, very mindful of the legislation and, in terms of increase. But we also know we have very limited powers on Uber and other companies. So obviously these people who are our license holders, they are our local residents. They are trying to make money. And they're trying very, very hard, not just working hard, but also looking after our residents, in terms of, obviously, we don't have very strong transport infrastructure, So these are the key people who help, moving people from, one place to another. So are we considering their consultations, because obviously we have the Uber, obviously their costs are far lower, and considering all these costs and everything, and looking into these consultation responses, is there any way we can reconsider, because sometimes it feels like maybe 10, 15, 50 pounds is not a huge amount, but for some people, it makes a huge difference. So are we considering all these elements when we are proposing these increases?
Yes, certainly we have given consideration to that, and as I say, we try our hardest to ensure that we keep our costs to the bare minimum. As I say, most of our costs are in staff. We don't spend a lot of money on other things, so that's where the bulk of our costs are. It is very difficult. We have to try and remain as cost neutral as we can, so we don't put a burden onto the other residents of Thurrock to sort of subsidise you know, somebody else's sort of taxi license or something like that. So the legislation allows us to be cost recovery. Our model tries to get to as close to, you know, as cost recovery as possible. But we are very dependent, as I said, on the number of licenses, the number of applications, as to what our income actually is.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, is there not a danger of a bit of a, not quite a self-fulfilling prophecy, but a bit of a vicious circle here? Because if you are going to, I mean, and certainly according to these responses, there's certainly nobody there that feels these increases, proposed increases, are reasonable. There is always the chance that, as you say, you haven't had that many licenses recently. Chances are you're going to have even fewer as we hike the prices. And in response to having ever fewer licenses, as you say, most of your spend is on salaries. What you probably have to do is hike the licenses again. You are setting yourselves up for a bit of a vicious circle here, are you not?
I mean, I think, you know, the only thing I can say is that you know, we do keep this under review, and I think whilst licenses, you know, particularly around the taxi trade, have decreased, you know, we have seen an increase in the number of animal licenses that are out there. We have seen, you know, an increase in the amount of enforcement we're having to sort of do around, you know, other aspects of licensing. So, you know, there's, you know, if you ask me honestly, have I got enough staff to do everything we need to do everywhere? The answer is probably no. But, you know, we run at a level where, you know, there's enough staff that we ensure that we meet our statutory requirements. We ensure that we can, you know, ensure that the public are protected, because that's ultimately what our role is. But we certainly haven't got you know, an excess of staff that you know, we could look at reducing. You know, we will keep that under review. We are beginning to see nationally an increase in new applications around the sort of taxi trade, etc. You know, I'm as part of a shared arrangement, I support Brentwood Council. They've seen a massive, well, not a massive growth, but they're beginning to see a growth again in their taxi industry. I know Uber are looking to license with some other local authorities, and there are some other big companies that are also looking to sort of spread their wings a little bit, and they do bring an increase in trade. So I think we've probably got to the point where the trade's at the lowest numbers that we've seen for a while. The hope is it will grow. If it doesn't, we'll just keep it under review from the staffing levels.
So if you'll excuse the pun, are the motors for growth companies like Uber?
I mean, certainly, you know, companies that are grasping, you know, sort of modern technology, realising who their audience and their customer base is now. You know, the days of people going, you know, certainly in Thurrock, out, you know, pubs and nightclubs and then coming out and standing in the queue, you know, outside that have long gone. You know, commuters on the trains, you know, they like to come off a train, you know, and actually know that there's a car waiting for them, as opposed to having to get out and hope that there's a car standing at the rank, sort of thing. So, you know, the ways people are accessing, you know, license services, etc., like that, is changing, and I think it's those companies that are moving with the times, you know, that are sustaining themselves. You know, others that haven't moved with the times, we are seeing sort of falling away.
And I ask this because it sounds like from a limited number of responses you had to your consultation, that effectively you're being told that these increases are going to further disadvantage local smaller operations against the Ubers of this world. So this is probably why Councillor Lydiard is saying we need to make sure we have a good PR take on this, because it could very easily be construed as, well, we're happy to work with the bigger, not necessarily local operators, not so worried about these smaller local ones, and particularly bearing in mind that the largest element of our costs are salaries. We need to be able to explain that in a way that doesn't make the average taxi driver think that he's subsidising people working here.
Very much so. I mean, I think, you know, we are very supportive of the local trade. You know, the laws allow, you know, companies outside of the borough to come in and do work inside the borough. That's just, you know, a change in times. You know, the advent of the mobile phone, an app on the mobile phone, you know, has opened those doors, sort of thing. But yeah, no, we are very mindful of that, and we, as I say, we'll keep all of that under review.
Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, I'm going to come in there. We've had a lot of questions around the decline in trade here in Thurrock. Do you think it's worth us having a working group here at the council, maybe under the place or the corporate committee, asking to look at this a bit further and maybe invite some of the trade to come in and maybe look at ways we can expand our trade in Thurrock?
I mean, sort of looking at the economic development sort of side of things, and I mean, I think there's always you know, purpose in trying to engage with the trade, trying to support them, you know, the best we can. You know, from the licensing point of view, we have to wear two hats. You know, ultimately we are the regulator. We are there to ensure that, you know, that the public are safe. However, you know, part of our role, I see us as enablers. You know, we're there to try and support local businesses to thrive. Things we can do around that is looking at our policy and trying to, you know, make it as accessible and as easy to sort of, you know, become licensed in this borough, but without lowering standards and without putting the sort of the public in Thurrock at risk. There's definitely merits to some engagement there. We would just need to see who would be the right people to sort of lead on that.
Thank you. Could we put that as a recommendation for you to look into that and report back to whenever the next licensing committee is, if everyone's agreement in that? So what I'm asking is to add an extra recommendation for Paul to go away, do a little bit of work on maybe setting up a working group where we can come together and look at ways we can increase our licensed trade here in Thurrock. Would everyone agree with that? Like a term of reference. Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. I think actually we can probably, a number of the things we've talked about tonight, I know a lot of it's been around the actual price, but as you've mentioned a few times, that maybe some of the issues facing local drivers are not just around the price of a licence. Again, I suppose one, as an ex-comms person, part of my mind is always on the PR. I think it would be, A, potentially very useful to taxi firms, and B, potentially very useful to us to, as you said, we're not just regulators, we're enablers, to show ourselves enabling. So what are the challenges facing taxi drivers in the round? What can we do to help them make it easier to actually come into the trade and stay in the trade? And I think certainly something with that kind of a, with that kind of a working title might be actually be something be useful. And far too many beads in that sentence, but you know what I mean.
Go ahead.
And I think, you know, certainly, you know, when we look at the report we had last time, which we'll come back to hopefully the next licensing committee, when we look at our taxi policy, that's where we're setting our sort of rules and regulations around that. And we are, you know, looking to align ourselves, you know, with national guidance, but make it more affordable and you know, things around the vehicles. The proposal is that we'll remove our age limits, but bring in, you know, an emissions category, but perhaps a little bit more regular testing. So people can buy vehicles that are slightly less expensive and keep them for longer, making it more affordable. So whilst, you know, things are going up, I think from a policy consideration point of view, we are looking to try and ease the burdens and make it you know, more cost effective for people to operate within Thurrock.
Councillor Lydiard.
Yeah, I'm just thinking this would be an ideal for a working party, one of the overview and scrutinies to take up. Probably not here, but might be something you want to recommend in the overview and scrutiny work programme.
I think the best way to do this, if everyone's agreed, is I'll read out a recommendation that Paul goes away, gets works on a terms of reference, so we can put that forward. Even if we haven't got a meeting prior to that be coming out, you can do a briefing document to the licence committee, if that's okay with you.
I think I would need to explore with other officers from other areas of the council, you know, what is possible, what will be the remit, etc. of that. So, I mean, I'm happy to go and explore and have those conversations and report something back to the next licensing committee or that, or come in via the chair. I don't want to too heavily commit myself to something that so it's not my area of expertise necessarily. So. I would need to sort of seek additional support on that.
We'll word it to that point. Councillor Lydiard?
I think it's a sensible decision for the chair to work with the officers in the short term and see what you can get out of that.
Councillor Chuckwood?
Yeah, Chair, actually I'm in support of that. If your suggestions, if Mr. Paul can go and explore some areas and see if there's areas you can make some amendments, right? And find out exactly the situations, the economical situation some of these people are going through. And then you can come back to us.
Thank you, Councillor Chuckwood. Councillor Abbas?
Personally, as I mentioned earlier, looking into the consultation responses and the costs involving these salaries, I would go for restructuring our own organization, but obviously I'm very, very mindful of what statutory kind of like, wise, how many staff do we need to have or a certain cost. But I don't think so, Chair, because setting up a working group which will address something. So what powers will we have to implement those recommendations? Does this comes under under this committee? So I think this is, as officer has said, I think maybe from my personal point of view, I think the best is we need to ask legal, to have their advice, maybe Democratic Services or someone, to see. We don't want to step into something, where it's just something, we are recommending something which is fruitless or pointless.
And that's why I think it's important we word it as explore and report back before we get to that. I don't think there's any harm in exploring and actually investigating what's possible. With that, Councillor Fletcher.
I think it's a fairly safe bet, Chair, that you better have done some pretty good thinking about everything in the round before you even start about thinking about reducing staff. I think you probably would find, Councillor, that that needs a bit of legal and other thinking beforehand. So I don't think the problem goes away if you put it in those terms. I think we need to be broad in our thinking, but the aim needs to be how do we, in the round, make the local taxi firms' jobs a little easier to compensate for the fact that their costs are going up.
Thank you. If that is everything, go on.
I hope you don't mind one more question. I did notice, Paul, that one area for 23-24 that we did actually manage to come out with a surplus was sex establishments. And I was just wondering if there are any lessons from that particular industry that we can apply to some of the others.
In short, probably no. I think is the only answer I can give to that.
You can raise your hand? Councillor Chuckwood.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the Commissioner's comment. He says there's no need for commissioners to make any comment on this. Can you explain, please?
It's a statutory duty, so the commissioners wouldn't have
The
control
report
over
is
this.
self.
Yeah. Thank you. If there's no more comments? No. Thank you. So we'll move on. I'm going to actually suggest, can we have a quick 2-minute suspension of, so we can just go through this recommendation? And I'm gonna, we'll write the second one first. and then we'll come back and do that if that's okay. So we can all agree offline, just for the quick 2 minutes. Thank you. I think it's easier if we take this offline. So what I'm proposing we use as our recommendation, if Paul's happy with this, for the second recommendation, for the licensing manager to explore a work. Okay, thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Chair, I'm just conscious, sort of echoing, I think, a similar sentiment to Councillor Abbas. I've just expressed dissatisfaction, to put it mildly, at significant increase in some of our licences, and our officer has told us, Paul has told us, that's primarily down to our costs are primarily salaries of staff. I don't really then want to go and put more work on his staff, right? Because I've just kind of, in a way, criticised the fact that our fees are going up in large part to cover, it covers in large part salaries, and then to go and whack more work on his staff, I'm not sure. So if you want to do this, I'm happy to vote for it, but only if it's a really informal, quick look for Paul and it doesn't take up too much of his time or his staff's time.
Paul, can you answer that, please?
I think I'm happy to, explore with other colleagues from other teams within the council what opportunities would arise for us to look to sort of support or mitigate the issues that the taxi trade have said within their consultation response, and maybe feedback to you, Chair, as initial conversation to see whether there's any legs in that, going back. I think that wouldn't be too onerous for me to have those conversations and report back to you, Chair. I don't know what other people are going to say, so it's very difficult to sort of, commit to something too solid. But I'm happy to explore it, but I think, in an informal way that I can come back to, report through you.
Thank you. Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think you're going to answer the way I think you are. Is there actually any data that for the amount of fares that are actually accumulated through the year by cabbies? Is that a known quantifiable figure?
No, I think the only people that may know anything like that would be HMRC, but we're not privy to that information.
Okay, yeah, I don't think we go there. But, I am a regular cab user. I mean, in fact, I took 2 cabs in Manchester today, and it regularly comes up that, nationwide, as far as I'm aware, cab fares or rides are decreasing. I don't know for what reason. I really don't know. But is it a trend in Thurrock that or that actually the amount of fares are actually decreasing? And is this more a kind of a commercial kind of arena that we're talking about here, where the service is declining, and there just isn't the demand? And this is maybe the reason why cabbies are very they're basically fighting for the same business. And it gets very cutthroat, and it's only the toughest will survive, or they're actually driving their own wages down anyway. I mean, like I say, I quite often come out of the ranking greys, and there's like 10, 12, 15 cars there. I mean, this is not an indication that there's enough people out there to actually keep these vehicles on the road anyway.
And I think, there is definitely, the Hackney Carriage private hire trade nationally has changed, and I think the biggest change is post-COVID, because people, the amount of people commuting into London, I'm sure has dropped significantly, since that time. I've got no facts or figures to back that up. It's just sort of my personal view on it, really. There are businesses that do respond to change better than others. And sometimes those businesses survive. There are businesses that don't respond to change in circumstance and trends that don't survive. And I think it's very difficult to say. Some, report to me that they are doing really well. Some are reporting to me that they're struggling. So it's hard. No doubt there are people out there that are struggling, and I'm not saying they're doing the wrong thing. But there are winners and losers in all of this. And I think, all we can do is to make sure we're applying everything, fairly consistently. We're trying to reduce the burden on them as much as we can. However, we've still got to maintain those standards and protect the public, which is, ultimately what our focus and our goal's got to be around.
Yeah, really, just to sort of sum up, I'm happy with the way your department sort of takes care of the licensing side of this. And you've obviously mentioned that initiatives that you're exploring with regards to obviously lowering the age of the vehicle, and these are all things to tempt people into the business and actually to aid them to make more money. But I don't see what, it's an entirely different thing if you're actually trying to think of areas and ways to actually encourage people to come into the cab trade. And that I really can't understand. That is going outside of the licensing committee's remit, I think, and actually possibly your remit as well.
It's definitely outside of my remit. Whilst we're happy to support, an economic development team that want to sort of see growth within the town, so we are enablers. We're there to try and, if you've got lots of pubs opening up, try and support them and process applications as quickly and as efficiently as we can. But we're not necessarily the drivers of that thinking. We're happy to contribute to that, but that's not really our key role.
Thank you. Councillor Abbas.
Thank you. Just on your recommendation aspect, obviously, even if they will look at this, how we can kind of motivate people or look at reasons why the trade is going down, or how we can support them. So this is only, even whatever consultation we will take, the ultimate kind of result would be, this would be just a one aspect. This would be just one aspect. So looking at these licensing committees parameters, so does the wider, for example, opening up new pubs, doing different businesses, starting up something, and also obviously, the cab drivers here who are here, their costs are slightly different than, for instance, if someone is driving a Uber from London and he's here, and someone has an app and he's suddenly check something, so he will find something £5 or £6, so someone will literally book onto this, so the new technology and everything, obviously customer will look at where he will or she will save the costs. So I think we have to kind of focus slightly on this particularly item of agenda and see if we are proposing anything. I don't mind. No, obviously we all are here, for the betterment of our drivers, our local businesses, But we also have to be mindful, does this come under our kind of jurisdiction? Can we do practically something, or it would be just an exercise? I know, you are coming from, your intention is also good, how we can help and support these cab drivers or our taxi drivers. But the point is, the practical point is, can we look at these prices? Can we change these fees? Can we reduce these fees? To me, the chances are almost 0 or 1%. If we can, if there would be, maybe if they will squeeze through some other channel, so maybe they would be, for instance, if it's from 185 is going up to 215, which is an increase of £30. So maximum, if even they will say, for example, if they will cut the corners or somewhere, or reduce number of hours or some officers are working, so it will go down to say 210. So the difference would be only £5. So we have to see either, and then I think if do we have to approve this today? Because if not, because I've seen your risk assessments, and it says if you don't approve this, then practically we wouldn't have any fee, and we wouldn't be able to apply. I think I read this in green.
We would normally bring changes to fees and charges in line with the rest of the council's fees and charges from the 1st of April. Obviously, the longer we take to potentially increase any fees and charges, the bigger deficit that's growing there. So we don't have to approve it tonight, but we would be at a disadvantage, and it would cost us, if we didn't, bring about those changes as soon as possible.
Or we can put a recommendation, if on your if you are keen to put these recommendations, we can say, look, can as a council put form a working group where we can say how we can help and support small businesses, and whatever committee it comes under. So obviously it wouldn't come under technically licensing committee. So whatever committee it would be under, so they will consider, or it would be a wider political kind of spectrum, from all parties. They establish a working group to see how we can work together to help and support our small businesses.
So I'll just go back to the recommendation which I'm proposing for the licensing manager to explore a working group looking at the decline of the licenses in Thurrock and what can potentially be done to support. I don't think exploring, and if you come back to us and say, actually, we can't do it under this remit, but we can pass this on to the place committee or the corporate committee, would that be an issue?
I think initially, rather than sort of reporting back to this committee, it might be worth having a conversation with you. We can do that fairly quickly, and then based on the outcome of the sort of exploration, the conversation I can have, I'll have a better picture of what is possible.
Okay, should we put that in the recommendation with initial report back to the chair of licensing? Yeah? Okay. Any more questions? Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I'm new here and I'm learning on the job, guys. From what I've heard, it seems to me we have two things that we're trying to talk about. We have the actual question of the fares, the increases, licensing increases, sorry. And obviously we've gone into the taxi wormhole. It does apply right across the board. And from the sound of it, there is very little leeway. If I understand you right, there is very, very little leeway for where we set those prices. And we then have, on the other hand, we've spent a lot of time discussing the fact that this is one of the factors, not the only factor, that may be putting pressure on a particular trade. As Councillor Arnold said, that may just be, we may just be witnessing a rather unfortunate historical epoch where the old cabbie is going out of business, and there may not be a lot we can do. It strikes me that, in line with what a lot of people have said here, that it doesn't sound like the bigger question is within our remit. It does sound to me a sensible move that coming out of this conversation, that we may want to find a vehicle for, a vehicle for discussing the bigger issue. But as far as, do we or do we not approve these figures today, it sounds like that conversation isn't going to make a difference to that, is it? So as I understand it, Chair, you're saying, well, yes, let's go to voting on these
Can I come in,
changes.
please? So what I'm saying is this will be the second recommendation. A lot of members today have raised concerns. Obviously, if members wish to vote down recommendation 1, that's in their gift. They are we all can vote whichever way we want on this committee.
That's what I'm trying to clarify, Chair.
Yeah. Councillor Lydiard.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the more work you put on our licensing manager, the costs will go up. I'm very much in favour of an informal meeting between yourselves, no recommendation whatsoever. And then if you feel after that conversation there should be a working party on it, when everybody agrees, then go ahead. But please don't give our licensing manager any more work. We want to keep our costs to an absolute minimum.
Councillor Abbas.
Can I just quickly add up, Chair? If we are looking into kind of like helping and supporting our cab drivers, then obviously we have to look at these other small businesses. For example, then skin piercing and all other these like street trading. So there is also an increase. So those are also very, very small businesses. They are not massive corporate companies. So I think it would be a very wide kind of range of something. I think let's take this item as it is in terms of this one, and then you and the officers, you can have a informal meeting. And if there is something we can call into next month or whenever is the next meeting, we can add up a separate agenda, like what measures can we do to support our small businesses, maybe.
I'm against that. For the simple reason is the earliest we'll probably meet again will probably be September, I reckon.
I'd hope we'd have something before September. I know there's nothing provisionally programmed in, scheduled in, but yeah, I'd hope early summertime to have another meeting.
But the chair can call a meeting anytime because there is no PERDA period, there is no election. So technically, the meeting can be held even next month.
Unless we're going to say something new, councillors, we're going to have to move on. Is it something new? Is it you got anything new to add? Because we're going round in a circle.
I was just going to say, we've got Cabinet next week, and this will go to Cabinet. If it don't go to Cabinet, then surely they would be the best people to say, well, a complete review of all licence fees rather than ourselves.
You got any questions, Councillor Chuckworth?
No, because what I was actually going to say is that by the time Paul come back to you with some explanations, right? I think you can actually go for the meetings that should be for the scrutiny, committee to make a decisions about the next step.
Okay, I'm going to go to the recommendations, and I will add the second recommendation in, and we'll just vote. So, recommendations. For the reasons set out in this report, the committee is recommended to agree for the proposed fees and charges as set out in Appendix 2 for the 2025-2026 financial year. Can we please raise a hand if we agree? Against? Abstention. So that is carried. Second recommendation, for the licensing manager to explore a working group looking at the decline of licences in Thurrock and what can be potentially be done to support with an initial report back to the licensing chair. Can I please raise your hands if you agree? You mean to say it again? For the licensing manager to explore a working group looking at the decline of licences in Thurrock and what can be potentially be done to support with initial report back to the licensing chair. Please raise your hand if you agree. 1, 2, 3, 5. Against? Abstain? That is carried. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. That concludes the business of the meeting this evening. I now declare the meeting closed at 19:56. Thank you, everybody.